Hey, what's up, YouTube? We're back with another YouTube video, and this time we will be talking about warbonds. Been getting a lot of questions, especially since we just recently got another warbond. I've had enough time to start to talk about like the pros and cons of it, and I feel like it's ample time that I make like a warbond video where I talk about and discuss like the pros and cons of each warbond, and then get into which order and even rank in a tier list the different warbonds. So getting into it, obviously you have your first warbond that you're going to start the game with. It can get pretty pricey near the end, and what I recommend for most people is to probably stop around like the counter sniper or liberator penetrator area until you're starting to get like a lot of warp medals and stuff like that, because you can start working on the other warbonds that we're going to talk about. But the later weapons with the slugger, not particularly amazing. You have the breaker spray and pray, which has its moments, especially for like horde clear, which is pretty good, but in most situations it kind of feels lackluster. The scorcher itself is fantastic, but it takes a lot of medals to get to, so it's a bit unfortunate on that one. As far as the boosters, muscle enhancement is probably the last booster that you really need. But even then, you don't have to be the one on your team to get it, so it's not a high priority, which is why I typically say, you know, stamina enhancement, kind of the last page that is like truly important until later when you have tons more medals. Going into Steel Veterans, this was our first warbond that we got at the beginning of the game. Liberating Concussive has been changed a lot over the course of the game so far. It's in a strong spot now. I think a lot of people are starting to see its value of just a CC machine, especially versus the new Predator strain. If you've noticed, it's very good at just keeping distance. You have good aim. You can kind of just keep nailing enemies and keep them far from you. It might not have the highest DPS in the game and probably needs a little bit of a fire rate bump, but very strong for the people that just want to keep things at bay and more or less like a sport weapon. Senator, as we've talked about in our tier list, very strong with the Pen 4. It's the only Pen 4 secondary that you can grab other than the ultimatum. Very, very strong. Incendiary Breaker, you know, we've talked about how it's like really good for traffic clearing. Ammo is a concern, so, you know, keep that in mind. Incinerate, it's okay. It's okay. Flexible reinforcement budget has been buffed quite a bit, just giving it, like, you can get your reinforcements back a lot faster. I don't necessarily recommend a booster like this just because it will end up feeling like you are, you know, planning for failure more or less. But if you're like this close from like being able to, you know, do the next tier of mission in your group and you just feel like, oh, if we only had a couple more revives faster, okay, I understand where you're coming from with that one. Jar Dominator, strong weapon, as you already know, lots of stagger, good damage, medium pen. I'd say the only negative it really has is smaller magazine, 15 rounds, and handling, but very strong if you place those rounds correctly. Armor wise, not the strongest armor in the game. It's good. It's good, especially now that you're breaking your limbs quite often. But I find, I was talking about this on stream, you know, there's going to be situations where the throwing range is great for some situations, but if you're swapping back and forth, you're really messing with your visual, like, muscle memory of like knowing how far your stratagem is going to go if you throw it at that particular angle. So you'll find a lot of people that either love it or they're like, I avoid it because I don't like having to swap back and forth. So keep that in mind. Next one, Cutting Edge, probably some of the like best overall like weapon combos in this, because you have to get the Blitzer and the Sickle, which are unlimited ammo, in theory, limited ammo for the Sickle. Primaries that just are workhorses. If you like an AR, that's the Sickle. If you like more of a shotgun, a limited ammo shotgun with tons of stagger, that's the Blitzer. It's always very high on tier lists, except for automatons, but we kind of understand that. Dagger, solid secondary, unlimited ammo as well, very good. Punch the Plasma has been like, you know, kind of taking a dip. It's basically just not keeping up with the rest of the power creep as far as other weapons are going, but it's still strong. Same with Stun Grenade. It's kind of taking a dip, but it's still a very good utility for early game. The armor, it's something that typically you wouldn't wear because you're running an arc thrower. You're running it because your teammate keeps killing you with your arc thrower, basically. This is like that armor, right? If you're just getting annoyed if someone keeps killing you with arc thrower armor or arc throwers, like that's it. It has some more usage on aluminum missions to stop you from dying to the Tesla towers, or if you get too close to a harvester, it can prevent that. But yeah, keep that in mind. Solid Warbond though. Localized confusion, definitely an early game booster for many if you feel like you're just getting overwhelmed by another bug breach, another bug breach, another bug breach. Like it's taking you too long to clear the first bug breach that a second one is starting again. This can alleviate a lot of that. So it's a fairly good booster and it makes for a good Warbond, honestly. Probably the best overall Warbond, a little bit of a spoiler, but I think many people would agree. Thermite, absolutely insane grenade. Adjudicator, very solid AR. Extraction Pilot, you can just ignore this part of the of this Warbond, but Eruptor, it's a good spot. It's probably going to get some changes in the near future, but it's a fairly high utility. It can be used pretty effectively with some armors like Peak Physique and stuff like that, but it really does get drowned out by the crossbow. This thing's absolutely insane at the moment. If you are good at not blowing yourself up with it, it's probably overall the best weapon in the game. Utility, damage, AoE. You pair it with like the Urban Legend armor, and it just gives you that reload speed, so you can just keep pumping out shots. Very strong. Grenade pistol, highest utility secondary in the game, other than the ultimatum, but very good. Highly recommend. As far as the armors, though, nothing too particularly interesting other than like you get some light grenade armor, which is fairly good. Yeah, nothing too crazy as far as the armor. So it's like mostly just a weapons Warbond, but it's game changing in the sense that you get a primary and secondary weapons that can, you know, augment your loadout, right? So you don't have to bring a support weapon or grenades to blow up a bug hole anymore because you have crossbow, right? Or you don't have to bring an AT weapon because you have thermite, right? So this is probably the most impactful Warbond in the game purely because of that. Polar Patriots, another solid Warbond as far as guns. Armor is pretty lackluster, like very lackluster. Motivational shocks, it's okay. If you guys don't know what it does, it essentially shortens the period at which you're slowed by like the acid of a, you know, tongue attack from a hunter or like the slowing plants, things of that nature. It's okay. It's mostly a bug stratagem, but yeah. Or booster, sorry. Tenderizer, very solid light pen AR. It's kind of just like an upgrade over the regular tenderizer, many would argue. With a good accurate hand, you can make it work quite well on bots. On squids, it's quite good, especially if you bump the fire rate up, shooting the chests of the tier 2 enemies. And on bugs, you know, as long as you're not messing around with too many medium armored enemies, it feels good. Pummeler, it's kind of gone up and down. Its stun is a bit too low at the moment. And I'd honestly probably prefer using deliberate concussive in more situations, but solid CC oriented support weapon, and it's one-handed, so it has that going for it. Impact Incendiary, it's all right. You know, nothing too special, but it's another option for horde clearing. And then probably the shining star of this Warbond is the Purifier. Very good weapon. It's essentially the crossbow with a 15-round magazine, right? So less reloading in general, but it doesn't have the utility. So you can end up having way more damage output because of the Purifier, but you have less utility. So if you have the utility somewhere else in your loadout somewhere, this is really good to bring, right? Obviously, you have to be somewhat used to like charge weapons and be okay with charge weapons, but it's extremely strong, you know, outside of the utility aspect. Verdict, solid medium pen pistol. Can't go wrong with it in many situations. Kind of feels like a deagle. Probably the only armor that is to say anything about is the scout armor, but you're already getting that in the base Warbond, so it's nothing too crazy. You have some damage resistance. Like, I don't know. I find the armor in this to be particularly nothing, so I wouldn't really worry about it too much. It's mostly for the weapons. It's a pretty solid ones at that. All right, one that is all about the armor is the Viper Commando. It's got the handling armor, and also for melee builds, if you are picking up some of the melee weapons, you want to go to melee build, you're going to pair that with Peak Physique armor. Being able to handle like the larger weapons more consistently and easily, like MG43, recoilless for some people, autocannon for some people, just very strong. It's hard to deny how good the armor is, even though it kind of feels like a one perker at times because you're not really using the medium armor, or sorry, the second melee part of the armor. Liberator Carbine, it's okay. It's nothing special, too special. It's just basically just a fast firing Liberator with more recoil. So many people will probably be like, and not use it. but it's okay. Bushwhacker, fun for those builds where like you have like a crossbow and you just need a close range weapon to kind of push things back. Basically, Bushwhacker is a Punisher, regular Punisher shotgun with, you know, your secondary slot, which is nice. It's nice to have. I'll use it from time to time. It's pretty good. Pretty good. More peak physique armor. This is the heavy. I use it quite a bit on bots, especially with the heavy machine gun. That makes it feel a lot better. Throwing knife, it's more of a meme. Wouldn't really worry about it. The iron sights or the sights on it are off because it's a third-person camera and you're throwing it, and your character doesn't really align it properly, so it's like whatever. And then you get experimental infusion, which is a very solid fourth booster. Many people bring it as the fourth booster, giving you extra restoration. It's giving you additional restoration of health. The stims also give you, I think it's 10% movement speed and 10% damage reduction, which is solid. You know, it's just an overall, like, let's make something like your stims that are already good better. So getting you out of those hairy situations a little more often, which is cool. Freedom Flame is more of like your bug divers loadout kind of warbond. It can be used pretty effectively versus voteless, but that's about it. Your cookout is probably the shining star of the warbond. It's essentially just an easier to use liberate or incendiary breaker, because you get more knockback. You get less durable damage, but you get tons more knockback. It has a pump action, so it slows down your fire rate, so you're not wasting your ammo as much, because a lot of people tend to just like fan the hammer with the incendiary breaker and run out of ammo too fast. So this will kind of prevent that. This is really good against those predator bugs, just keeping them at distance, pushing them back. Very strong. Highly recommend. Flame armor in general has some tie-ins with the flamethrower itself, obviously. Some of the weapons like the Torture and Crisper, which are essentially just flamethrowers in your primary and secondary slot, which are good, which are very good. They have the damage decrease because they don't get the bonus damage of the ship module, but that's here and there. Honestly, I bring the Torture more than I bring the actual flamethrower when I bring flame weapons. The other thing is that the flame armor pairs really well with the DE sickle or the dickle. Very strong at allowing you to fire farther into the heat band, so you can take advantage of that AP4 or AP3 much more often. So yeah, solid warbond, but mostly for chaff clearing. Fire hell pods still not very good. They still need to keep working on it, but primary weapons wise, it's got some solid ones if you're into that kind of weapon tier. Chemical agents, this went from probably being the bottom to being one of the better, if not like, you know, up there in the top 3. This warbond has gone crazy. It used to just be the gas grenade. That would be the only reason you would pick this up. Gas grenade, still amazing. I still don't understand why they made it blow up bug holes and like blow up like Tesla towers and stuff like that. It was already an amazing grenade. It's even better now. It also has a sterilizer, which arguably is somewhat of a worse flamethrower, but it has some unique gameplay options where you can kind of just like keep gassing everything around you and just run right through the nest, right? Especially if you pair it with the heavy gas armor, so you don't take any gas. So you can pair that with gas grenades, kind of like throwing them out in front of you, standing in the gas grenade. You don't take any gas damage if you wear the heavy gas armor with vitality booster. Fun fact. So you can just kind of keep everything CC'd and just kind of like do the mission without really engaging anything, which is kind of interesting. But another shining star that just got buffed massively is the Guard Dog Dog Breath. This thing is way better than it used to on bugs and Illuminate specifically, and it has some usage on bots. But if you don't know what they did, basically it's way smarter. It will not try and kill an enemy with the gas now. It will try and infect it with the gas, move on to the next target, move on to the next target. So you could have 20 enemies in front of you and it will pretty well get all of them gassed, which is sick. It's so much better than it used to be. It does have an ammo supply, but it tends to not really run out. You will most likely get a resupply somewhere along the lines, so you won't have to really worry about that. Also, it lasts longer. It went from 6 seconds to 10 seconds on the duration of the gas, which is very noticeable. Last part is a stim pistol. Fun for like a team build. Just remember when you wear the medic armor and have the stim booster from the Vibrant Commandos, it does affect this thing. So you can play team medic and be, you know, the helpful one. I think it has the most usage on bots because tends to be like more of a cover shooter, so people tend to stand still more often. I'm still hoping they remove some of the sway to the weapon, but you know, solid weapon and fun to use for team play. True Divorcers is another strong weapons one, but more or less feels mediocre at times. The Halt has a really cool fire option where you can have EMS rounds and medium pen flechette rounds, which is cool. And then you can swap between the two. And there's kind of like a technique where like you change. I can actually show it to you real quick for anyone that is curious. You go into keybinds, and then you're going to go to combat, and then you go to weapon wheel, and you basically set the same keybind for both your weapon wheel and weapon wheel left, right? And then you keep both of them on press. So when you press that weapon wheel button, it will automatically swap between your EMS and flechette rounds with one press, right? If you don't do this, it takes a lot longer to kind of swap between the two. Anyway, so that being said, the Halt is a solid weapon. It doesn't have much range in particular, but if you utilize that Halt tech and you're just going back and forth between the EMS rounds can be very useful. And I've seen some builds where they like take it with like a primary support weapon, like the MG43, and basically they just swap to the Halt whenever they need some EMS, right? Brood Commander's charging you, swap to the Halt, keep it on EMS rounds, pump them, right? Swap back to the machine gun, right? So it can be pretty cool for those kind of builds, right? So keep that in mind. Dead Sprint is an interesting stamina related booster, but it's nothing too crazy. A lot of people tend to not love it that much. But it is nice for like hot planets in particular where you're stamming out a lot. And that death might have been caused by the fact that you stammed out. So you're a little too slow to like dodge the charger, for instance. So it can prevent quite a bit. I think it is a little bit of an underrated booster. Going to the next page, we have the Reprimand. This one is a bit of a weird one. It's an SMG. It's two-handed, medium pen. It ends up feeling like a little brother to the Adjudicator in many respects. But the problem with it is that it has way worse bloom. So when you're firing it, the cone of fire, like how inaccurate it is quite high. So you got to be careful with that weapon. It's fun to use. I kind of wish it was almost like more of an AR and it was just accurate. It just does not feel very accurate, so I don't always tend to use it. It's pretty fun on bug missions because bugs tend to stay closer to you, so the bloom isn't really noticed all that much. But yeah, not my favorite. We have the Loyalist. The Loyalist is a fun one if you kind of use your secondary weapon as your primary weapon at times, because it's not a traditional hand cannon or something like that where you're like swapping to it in a panic. You're going to be bringing it out preemptively so you can charge it. If you don't charge it, this thing doesn't feel very good. So keep that in mind. I'm not always a huge fan of it, but I think some players that, you know, tend to run out of ammo on their primary weapon and need something to like feel like a primary in their secondary slot, it's quite good for that. The armor is a bit disappointing. Unflinching does work for anyone who's out there thinking it doesn't. It doesn't stop you from like being staggered. It stops your reticle from moving while you're firing it. Go into a mission, fire the laser cannon, get shot. You'll notice the laser cannon stays perfectly still. Or go into first person and you're like shooting at something, your reticle will not be moving. Like your scope will not be moving. So you'll notice it more or less when you are like first person. So if you're someone who tends to be first person shooting in Helldivers, you'll notice this a lot more than someone who tends to shoot in third person. It's a shame that there is no heavy version of this. I feel like this would have been like amazing in heavy armor, but it is what it is. Kind of a mid warbond at this point in the game, but not a terrible one. Urban Legends was our surprise warbond with the Illuminates. Absolute banger of a warbond because you have amazing armor. Unfortunately, I think because I disconnected. Whatever. It's got the siege ready. Oh no, there it is. It got the siege ready armor passive, which was broken, but now they've just said, hey, we're going to keep it as is, even in the broken state. So it gives you ammo capacity for your primary, secondary, and support weapon. If it doesn't have a backpack, that's where like the ammo stored. If it doesn't have a backpack, you get ammo for it, including like AMR and stuff like that. And the reload speed is for your primary weapon, not your secondary or your support weapon. If people tell you otherwise, it's placebo. Very, 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 very good armor. Easily one of the best in the game. Very strong. Optional. The directional shield is more or less a bot and somewhat of a illuminant, maybe illuminant more in the future. But if you like bringing like the crossbow or a one-handed weapon, I do think it actually plays a pretty good role as far as like it's like a better ballistic shield in a way. Ballistic shield has like a very finite amount of health before it breaks and then you have to wait for a cooldown, whereas this is rechargeable and it has more team play oriented gameplay, because you could kind of play it like Reinhardt from Overwatch, which is kind of cool. The melee weapon, probably one of the best melee weapons in the game. Stun plus good damage. Highly recommend. You can delete chargers with it if you get really good with it. Flame Sentry, it's kind of mid at the moment, but I'm hoping that it gets some changes in the future. Maybe like some stagger or more damage. Just tankier turret in general, because it almost feels like it burns itself to death, which is kind of weird. Armed resupply pods, it's kind of mid, but like I'm hoping that they like add the armed resupply pods to more pods, like EATs and maybe your like other support weapons and stuff. That'd be really cool. You get the heavy siege armor and then the crown of this warbond, the anti-tank emplacement. This thing is insane. It's so good, in fact, that like just this is worth the warbond purchase. It's cracked versus all three factions, especially on the Gloom Bugs planet, because it was probably the weakest on Bugs, right? But because there's so many armored enemies coming out of these breaches at the moment on the Gloom planets, this thing is so good for just setting up and then killing every charger, every impaler, every bile titan. You can shoot down drop ships of both Illuminant bug or bot, and you can snipe fabricators from across the map very effectively, and just objectives in general. It's extremely strong. 30 rounds, really good damage. It's disgusting. Like, it's just such a good stratagem. It's crazy that they added it. So, yeah, absolutely insane. And then we have our last one, Servants of Flame. Starting with off with the armor. It's more of just a fun armor. Nothing too crazy. I've seen clips of people like dying and then taking out a charger with them, or, you know, they ran out of grenade pistol shots, so they threw their body into a bug hole so they could kill the bug hole. It's got some cool things like that, but for the most part, it's just for fun. It's a funny, kind of armor to like mess with your friends about and stuff like that. It's not particularly useful, but it's fun. Double-edged sickle has, weird turbulence as a balance, but I think it's actually in a pretty good state now. If you invest in it, it's very good, like A+ status on all factions. If you don't invest in it, it's probably like a B- C+ kind of weapon. So definitely pairing this with the Freedom Flame Warbond, really good. But if you kind of pick up this first, you're probably going to look at this weapon as like a complete waste until later. Unless you buy like the Superstore, like Killzone armor or the Heavy Salamander armor. So keep that in mind. The Ultimatum is also one of those that has had a turbulent balance history. I do think it's in a good spot now. I use it as like my pocket Factory Strider or pocket Bile Titan killer, or just for objectives in general. For certain builds, you're not going to really have a Bile Titan killing weapon on. Especially if you're like bringing like a Stalwart or MG43, you don't want to just rely on your 500 kg Orbital Precision. This is basically 2 Orbital Precisions in your back pocket. Just make sure to pick up a yellow brick occasionally or supply backpack paired with it. Very strong. Make sure the majority of the damage is from the impact, not the explosion. But this thing is incredibly good on the bot front, being able to destroy jammers and sensor towers and things of that nature. So. And also just like absolutely destroy Factory Striders. Highly recommend checking this thing out. And it pairs really well with some builds. So yeah. Secret grenades. There's some cool tech that you can do with them, like throwing them behind a Hulk and then tracking it to the Hulk so it like hits them from the back on the radiator, which is pretty cool. But I just find in general it doesn't tend to do enough damage. And it might be something to do with like it exploding too early, but also it's lying to you. You might see a lot of like YouTube clips of 170 kill streak with secret grenades. They're OP. They're not. If you look in the clips and just in regular gameplay, if you throw this and it kills an enemy, it will often count for like 4 enemies on the kill counter, right? You'll throw it at a horde of Illuminate like voteless, and for some reason it just says 50 kills, but you only killed like 10 enemies. So don't listen to that. it makes you feel good when you see the big counter, but it's not actually killing that many enemies. It does not one-shot the elevated Illuminant, and it doesn't even kill the Tesla Tower on the Illuminant mission, which is so sad. So sad. You can track to it and everything, and it will not kill it. A little awkward to kill structures in general, so not a huge fan of it. I'm hoping it gets some changes in the future. I love the idea of it. It just isn't quite powerful enough yet. And the absolute fan service, Stratagem, Portable Hellbomb, good spot. It's good. Very fun. It does technically have the same problem as the Seeker, where it will sometimes count one kill as two. So keep that in mind. Sometimes you aren't killing as many enemies as you think you are. But regardless, very good for objectives, very good for breaches. But there's a huge skill gap on it. You're either going to be good with it and you can get tons of kills, or you're going to be quite bad with it and you might only get a few. So kind of depends on how you use it as a player more than most weapons. So we got all of them here. We have the standard Warbond we will start off with. I think it's a solid A, almost S tier. You know, it has some amazing things in it, but not always game changing. You almost can skip it in some ways. I think the most revolutionary stuff in it is mostly the boosters that you get from the base Warbond, rather than the weapons and other things that you get. So I'm like A plus S minus kind of territory. There's some good weapons that are absolutely insane in it, and then there's some that aren't. Kind of hard for me to place. I think I'm going to put it like A, but you know, picture it as more of like an A plus S minus. Steel Veterans is absolutely solid, but it's been kind of dropping as far as I want to put it. It's probably going to be like an A minus B plus. I'm just going to put it A minus for now, but we'll see how it stacks up later in the Warbond tier list. Next, I want to do Democratic Detonation. Very obvious why it's an S tier. It's absolutely insane, game-changing in a way. Highly recommend checking it out. Really strong one to pick up, probably your first one, you know, to start pairing with your original Warbond. You know, very strong. Cutting Edge, solid A. You know, just across the board. Stun grenades are fairly strong. You got a good booster. You got good weapons with the sickle and the blitzer. Might not be everybody's cup of tea, but I think many would agree that like it's solid. It's very solid, especially in the early game when you're first getting into the game. Like, people just love the blitzer. They're fanatic for the blitzer. They adore it. Polar Patriots is a difficult one for me, even though it has the Purifier, which I think is extremely good, and it has the Tenderizer, which I think is like a solid AR, and it has the Verdict, which is like a good weapon. I find the nade lets it down. I find the armor lets it down, and the booster is not particularly anything. So it's kind of like mid to some extent. And I find that the Purifier is kind of polarizing in the sense that, pun intended, it's kind of polarizing in the sense that the Purifier, like, some people love it, some people hate it because it's a charge weapon. So I'm going to kind of put it mid tier, but just understand that if you like charge weapons, and you want a powerful weapon, Purifier is very good. So yeah, kind of a disappointing one in the rest of the Warbond, but still a good Warbond overall. Vibrant Commandos, this one's a bit of a hard one for me to place. I think it's very similar to the Polar Patriots in the sense that the armor's fantastic, the booster is fantastic, but everything else is kind of like that's about it. Like the armor, like you don't really care about the weapons all that much. Like the nade is just the throwing knife, which is like arguably the worst one in the game. But at least the armor really pulls it up, and at least the booster pulls it up. But, you know, at the end of the day, you could say that like even it's lower because you could just buy the armor from the superstore and save yourself, because you could just get the Jaguar armor. I think it's the medium peak physique armor, so you can pull it down. The B tier is, I think, kind of deserving because, like, let's say you're just ignoring the superstore for now. Bushwhacker's pretty good. The normal Liberator is pretty low. I don't know. I'm feeling pretty confident in keeping it around B tier, but you know, I could see arguments for it being even lower. Freedom Flame is like your B plus A minus. It kind of depends on how much you like flame weapons and how much you value it alongside the Servants of Freedom. I do like it if you're a bug diver, if you're particularly a bug diver, like you're always bug diving. Freedom Flame, I think, is a solid one because you get the cookout, right? And you get some flame weapons, right? A plus, you know, A tier, somewhere in that range. But if you're someone who's like bot diving and limited diving, I feel like you're going to value it a lot less, especially since like the booster's still not in a great spot. Flame armor only really useful if you're bringing like a flamethrower or like using a lot of flame stratagems, which you often aren't. So like all of a sudden it goes down to B tier. I think I'm going to stick it in B plus, but just keep a caveat on that like if you particularly want a good like fire shotgun, 4 bugs, this thing's insane. Really good pickup. Chemical agents might be a bit of a hot take, but I'm putting it all the way in S tier. I think with the new gas guard dog and you have the grenade, it's really strong. It's really strong. And then the stim pistol, I think, is slowly starting to pick up. People are starting to use it more. And the sterilizer's in a fairly good spot. I'm starting to see people take it and like use it with like some unique builds. I really like the chemical warbond, and I think it's a very solid warbond to look into. I think it's fantastic. I highly recommend checking it out. It's quite good. It's quite good. Truth Enforcers, I'm going to put in C tier. Bit unfortunate, but I just feel like a lot of it tends to be like it's got a great look to it. It's probably the best looking warbond in that regard, but a lot of the weapons are kind of lackluster mid tier, and it doesn't really have great armor. If it had heavy armor on flinching, I think it would be a lot higher in my books, but I think I'm being pretty fair by putting it C and not D here. If let's say more people start using the halt with the halt tech and the reprimand gets a little bit of a buff for lowering its bloom, or the reprimand goes one-handed, I think all of a sudden things go a lot higher. Urban Legends, I think is S tier as well, going straight up. It's got amazing armor, got the first melee weapon, which is probably arguably one of the best melee weapons in the game, if not the best melee weapon in the game. And it's got armor, it's got the anti-tank emplacement, it's got the flamethrower, flame sentry, which is not that bad. It's pretty good at times if you can place it well. It's kind of like the old, it's kind of like Tesla Tower in general. If you place it well, it can actually like frag out. So yeah, highly recommend this warbond. The anti-tank emplacement all by itself can easily sell it to you, but it even has the best armor or some of the best armor in the game. So yeah. Servants of Freedom, bit of a tough one. Bad armor, well, fun armor, but it has the ultimatum, which is insanely good and high utility. It's got an insanely fun hell bomb. It's got a very mid to like bad nade, and then it's got the double-edged sickle, which requires a lot of effort and another warbond to pair together to make it good. It's probably B plus, if I'm being honest. It might edge up to A tier or so, depending on how much you value the hell bomb and the ultimatum. But I think I'm being pretty fair. Of an overall package, it's probably somewhere in the B tier. It's a very fun warbond, and I do think the ultimatum like kind of sells it all by itself. But the ultimatum isn't like the anti-tank emplacement, where it's like that impactful. It can do some very unique things, and it's like quite nice for like deleting bottle titans and stuff like that. But it's not like absolute game changing like the other ones. The way I'm thinking about my S tier right now is like these are game changing warbonds. Right? If you pick them up, you will see a dramatic change in how you play the game because of gas grenades, because of the gas guard dog, because of crossbow, because of anti-tank emplacement, because of the warbond armor. You know, A tier is like very strong, absolute solid weapons across the board, from like the Scorcher to like the Blitzer and stuff like that, Steeled Veterans. B tier is like it has something that pulls you towards it, but the rest of the warbond is kind of mid. And then C tier right now is feeling like, you know what I mean? Hopefully you guys agree with my tier list here. Let me know what you guys think down below. But as far as like buy order, as a last little point here, I would say like anything in the S tier you can't go wrong with, but I'd probably aim more towards Democratic Detonation. S tier, or sorry, like the S and A tier you can like interchange after that. But remember, personal preference, right? You may prefer flame generating weapons, like flame weapons, like Freedom Flame. Maybe that's like going to be way higher on your pick order. You know, maybe you really want melee armor to pair with your Urban Legends. Fiber Commando all of a sudden goes higher. Right, so it's really hard for me after Democratic Detonation or anything in S tier to really recommend after that, because it depends on where you're diving, how you're diving, and what other warbonds you have, because sometimes that matters, right? Steel Veteran is great for a bot player, but not as good for a bug player, for instance. Cutting Edge is fantastic for bugs and Illuminant, but not particularly great for bots, right? So think of it like that, right? Hopefully the walkthrough of all the warbonds at the start has kind of given you an idea, and the tier list can kind of point you in the right direction of my general thoughts. But feel free to join in on my live streams. I'm basically streaming every day in the mornings, 3 a.m. EST to about noon EST. So that's great for you EU, NA, late night NA streamer watchers. Feel free to drop by. Ask me questions about it. I love getting these questions and just like talking about it, right? If you don't agree with my warbond decision, let's talk about it. I really enjoy having these conversations. So consider dropping a like on the video if you enjoyed. Comment down below what you guys thought about the tier list and what your thoughts are on different warbonds, and what warbonds would you like to see in the future. Let me know. I'm actually really curious to read those comments. And check out the Discord linked down below as well. Thank you for watching. Have a great day. Peace.